So here we go. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? Okay, so one day I was working on Commander 2017 and Mark Gottlieb comes in. He's in charge of the cats deck. And he says, I've been thinking about it, and we have all these cats in Magic. We have these humanoid cats, we have these gigantic jaguars and lions and all these things, but I own some cute house cats. Where are all the house cats in Magic? And so he went back and sent me a design based on his house cats. It turned out to be Hungry Lynx, but to me, that will always be a house cat in my heart.
Where does the idea for a magic card come from?
I was in a playtest of my Murders at Karlov Manor Commander decks, and a player was playing the face down deck, and they played a card face down, and one of the players at the table made the classic joke of, I bet it's Willbender. It's always Willbender. To which, of course, the face down player replied, it can't be Willbender. I'm not even playing those colors. And that got me thinking, well, what if it was in those colors? And that's how Boltbender was born. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? I was playtesting my Commander 2017 Vampire deck, and I stole a creature with Captivating Vampire. I noticed that although it had been made a vampire, its effect weirdly still benefited cats. So that inspired me to go create New Blood, a card that could take a creature and change the type it referenced in its text.
Where does the idea of a magic card come from?
So I was in the Philippines, hanging out with some of the players there, some of the nicest players I've met anywhere. They were incredible. And one question I was asked a lot is, when are we going to get a set based on Filipino myth and lore? And there's so many cool creatures there and things to grab. And one that really stuck with me was the Mambabarang, this kind of witch that uses insects to enter the body of their enemies and deal damage to them. And so I came back and I designed the card Celestine Cave Witch in Mystery Booster as a nod to that. And we still haven't gotten the full Filipino set, but maybe someday. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? A couple times a year, we have kids from the Make-A-Wish Foundation come through to spend the day at Wizards. And it is the highest honor I could imagine. It's so touching that they want to spend their wish. They could choose anything to come and hang out with me and the other designers at Wizards on Magic Design. That is incredible. In the summer of 2022, this kid named Josh came through. Now, they're always Magic fans, of course, but Josh wasn't just a Magic fan, he wanted to be a Magic designer. And he brought with him actually a set he had created in a box. Now, normally I can't look at fan-made cards at all. But in this case, I got the clearance to look through his cards, and so I looked through them and chatted about them with him. And some of them were actually so intriguing to me that I took them back and tried to see if I could get them into Magic sets. And one such card, a card called Innocuous Researcher in Murders at Karlov Manor, was inspired by one of Josh's designs. Now, I'm happy to report that I've actually been in contact with Josh. I wanted to let him know that the card got made. He messaged me about it. And he's doing way better, and he still wants to be a Magic designer someday. And Josh, I hope to see you here. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? There was a fun little Warriors theme in Battle Bond Limited to span across all 5 colors. So because it showed up in 5 colors, I thought I'd make a nice, casual, 5-color Warrior Commander. So I made Najila. Oops.
Where does the idea for a magic card come from?
Kristen Gregory of the Commander Advisory Group tweeted at me a lot about making an anti-goad hate bear that could ungoad a creature. So, given there was a goad-heavy deck in Murders at Karlov Manor Commander, I designed Serene Sleuth, the goad hate bear she had been asking for. That one's for you, Kristen. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? So I built up a Turbofog deck to playtest with, and it's not the best deck in our internal playtesting, but it's really, really annoying. So in our next playtesting meeting, we add Damage Can't Be Prevented this turn to Skullcrack to make sure that Turbofog has a check. Sorry, Turbofog fans, that one's on me.
Where does the idea for a magic card come from?
I'm hiking the trail of Machu Picchu. It's a long route, and I'm surrounded by gorgeous foliage and the occasional stunning ruin. Eventually, I'll get there, and I even brought a copy of the city's blessing token to take a picture with next to it. But also, the trail is so long. So I start doing what I tend to do, make magic cards in my head. I decide to give myself random prompts. What about a card that feels like what I'm doing right now, just doing the same thing over and over, hoping to get somewhere? And that That's how I created How to Keep an Izzet Mage Busy, the Mystery Booster playtest card. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? Alright, so I had 5 minutes before a meeting and I needed to figure out one more card to fill out my commander set with so we could just review the whole set. So I was quickly trying to figure out what to do, and I was like, I don't know, what's an idea? Maybe something where like a vampire disappears in a puff of smoke. And so I typed in a card where you just vanish for a turn. Whatever, we'll change it later, we'll have months and months. Anyway, that's how Teferi's Protection was born, because everybody loved the card. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? I watched a talk one year at the Game Developers Conference, GDC, from the makers of Rocket League. Rocket League is like soccer, but with cars. A key element they talked about is that they changed the design of their game from having it end when the timer ran out to the game ending when the timer ran out and the ball hit the ground. This gave you the ability to mount a comeback. The dream that even if time was up, you still had one last chance to take it all. It really stuck with me. And later, when I was working on Battle Bond, a set based all around sports and esports tropes, I thought of this talk and made Stunning Reversal. With your back against the wall, it gives you one last chance. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? I was in an early Battle Bond playtest, and me and my two-headed giant partner both got super mana screwed. That sucked. So that inspired me to go make Jungle Wayfinder to help make sure less mana screw would be at the table.
Where does the idea for a magic card come from?
I was visiting Sheldon Menery at his home out in Florida, and we were talking about the kinds of effects maybe we should be trying out in Commander and what ideas we maybe had. And he had the idea for a card in red that didn't just destroy artifacts, but punish you for having a lot of them. It was a really interesting idea because it didn't destroy a couple mana rocks, but if you had a lot or were using too many treasure, man, that card could deal a bunch to you. So I came back and inspired by that talk, I made Sardian Avenger. Thank you, Sheldon. Miss you tons. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? When I was first playtesting Manifest in Fate Reforged, I really enjoyed the mechanic, but I thought it was a bit of a bummer that if you put a cool instant or sorcery face down, you couldn't really do anything with it. I wanted you to be able to turn it face up and cast it somehow. So I pitched a bunch of individual cards that maybe let that happen, but there just wasn't ultimately any room for them in the set. I kept the ideas in the back of my mind though, and when I was working on Commander 2018, I created Primordial Mist to let you cast those spells off the top of your library. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? It's the American Thanksgiving after I've been hired at Wizards, and I go back home and my mom has something for me. It's this little clear box, and inside the box are all these cards I made when I was a kid, when I was an aspiring magic designer, when I was like 11 and 12 and 13 years old. I used to host little sleepovers with my friends and we would all make magic cards together and then play them the next day. My mom would painstakingly cut them up overnight to have them ready to play the next day. And she found it while she was cleaning and wanted me to have it. And I started looking through the cards and they were ridiculous. There's stuff like a land that taps for 2 mana or to draw 2 cards, or an artifact that every turn lets you tap to just tutor for a creature and put it into play. Ridiculous stuff. But I'm flipping through them and I get to one and I'm like, I think we could actually do that. And I go back to Wizards after the break and I go into my Gatecrash meeting and I pitch it to Dave Humphreys, and the lead designer of the set, and he's like, you know what? Yeah, I think that could go in the set. And he puts it in and it's a Serene Remembrance. It's not a very powerful card. My idea was you could use it to help fight any mill that Dimir was doing. But it's a really meaningful card to me because it's like my 11, 12, 13-year-old self made a magic card that got made in a set.
Where does the idea for a magic card come from?
I love the Doctor Who two-parter, The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. It's a great story, and at the climax, everything goes just right, and a triumphant Doctor shouts, "Everybody lives. Just this once, Rose. Everybody lives." I wanted to make a card you could throw down as a surprise and shout that same line, which I'm fortunate enough to see Everyone Lives has done on more than one occasion. Where does the idea for a magic card come from? At Wizards, there's a wall where concept art for new worlds goes as it's coming in. And when I was working on Battle Bond, one time me and my team were walking around and we saw this really cool piece of a cheerleading homunculus on the wall. And we said, hey, we have to make a card out of this. So we went back and made a card called Jubilant Mascot. It's a simple uncommon, but I love how cheery that little guy is.
Where does the idea for a Magic card come from?
Back before Wizards, when I was playing competitive Magic, I loved the card Apocryphite. It was in one of my favorite decks I ever worked on and got to play, this makeshift mannequin style deck. Anyway, when I was working on the Maestro's deck in Streets of New Capenna, what I kind of wanted was an Apocryphite that kept coming back, but the problem was it didn't have 2 power to casualty the first time. So I came up with Sinister Concierge, kind of my nod to a new Apocryphite that comes back over and over and over again. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? We're in a design team meeting for Commander 2018, and as an offhanded comment, Scott Larrabee makes this joke of, we should have a card that turns servos into Thopters. And we all laughed, trust me, it was funny. But then that really stuck with me. And a couple days later, I thought maybe I should make that card, and I made a little card called Retrofitter Foundry, which has gone on to be quite popular and wouldn't exist if not for one offhanded joke.
Where does the idea for a Magic card come from?
Richard Garfield brought the idea for a game to a small little company called Wizards of the Coast. And that game was, of course, called Robo Rally. Peter Atkinson, the CEO, told them that what he was really looking for right now was a relatively fast game to play that used cards and people could play in spare time at conventions or before a session of Dungeons & Dragons. Did Richard have anything like that? Richard took that into his head and not long after hiked Multnomah Falls with his family, an absolutely gorgeous place out here in the Pacific Northwest. And during that hike, looking at the falls and the water falling down in the middle of nature is when he had it, the idea for a collectible card game, Magic: The Gathering. And the rest is history. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? I had just landed in Kenya. It had been a long 21 hours or so flight there. And on the flight there, I was actually designing cards for Dominaria, the upcoming set at that time. And so I land and I'm picked up by my host, this woman who runs an Airbnb. She's super nice. And we start driving in her car to the Airbnb, which is a ways away. And all my senses are being buffeted for the first time by the sights and sounds of a new place. I'm seeing things and smelling things and hearing things and looking all around me. And she's telling me stories of her family and the food she eats and the landmarks nearby and the things we're driving past. And we drive by this kind of one landmark, which is like the spire kind of sticking out. She points it out to me. And I look off at it and it's maybe a little bit damaged. It's this long kind of weathered spire. And she tells me what it is. And I think to myself, like a memorial to something long past. Dominaria could use something like that. And I open up my phone and I write down Memorial Land Cycle in Dominaria ? And that's how I got the idea for the memorials.
Where does the idea for a Magic card come from?
I always loved ninjas, and so I thought making a ninja lord would be awesome. And since we were probably not going to be going back to Kamigawa anytime soon, right? In Commander 2018, I put in a little ninja theme into one of my decks and made a cool ninja commander, Yuriko. Yep, I had to learn from that one too. Didn't quite turn out how I expected. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? I like to try a lot of other card games, both because I find them fun and because it's good to know what's happening elsewhere in the industry. Now, one thing that happens in a lot of other collectible card games is you can attack creatures directly. It's a pretty common thing. In fact, when I'm teaching Magic, usually I teach that really, really early. I was like, hey, here's a different way that Magic works from the games you might be used to. But when I was working on Mystery Booster, I thought, hey, what about Magic's take on attacking something directly, even more direct than Provoke? And that's how I came up with Seasoned Weaponsmith.
Where does the idea for a Magic card come from?
I went out to SCGCon Indianapolis last year where I played Commander all weekend long with players. I had a great time. But one thing that kept happening is I kept getting into pods with players that were playing a lot of extra turn spells or decks based around taking extra turns. Now, seeing how frustrated the whole table got at this kind of situation, myself included frankly, I came back from the trip and looked for some kind of upcoming playable card that I could get a line of text on to hate on extra turns, just so it would actually get into play. Unlike something like Stranglehold, which is very specific, if you put this kind of line of text on a card that would go into decks normally, it will actually come up. So I looked at my set, Murders at Karlov Manor Commander, and found Trouble in Pairs, where it kind of made sense to put it on there as a bonus. So extra turn players, that's for you, and I'm really not sorry about it. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? One day at work, I'm talking about Magic with my coworker Sarah. Now she's on a team that doesn't play as much Magic as we do, and she asks me a question, can a player have flying? To which of course I tell her no, a player can have flying. And then that gets me thinking, and I go back to my desk and I create the card, Sarah's Wings from Mystery Booster. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? In Conspiracy 2, the team created Recruiter of the Guard as a play on Imperial Recruiter from Portal 3 Kingdoms. I loved what the team did there and thought, maybe I can try that in Battle Bond, and I came up with Spellseeker as the blue member of the cycle and put it into the set. Now the cycle still hasn't been completed, the green and black ones are at large, but I love that I got to make the card, and that's what inspired me. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? So I was working on Doctor Who Commander and ended up cutting an ability for all of our Time Lords that acted sort of like a regeneration, where they got to flip until you hit a new Time Lord. But I wanted to make sure it got into the set somewhere. That flavor was so important. So I took that mechanic and directly put it on the card, Time Lord Regeneration. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? High-cost commanders are so much harder to make strong than cheaper ones, and over time, there's increasing pressure to play cheaper commanders. So we've tried to make some cards that are really good with expensive commanders, and Geode Golem, inspired by Ken Nagel pointing this out to me, was an attempt at that. Really good with commanders like Progenitus and Kozilek, not as good with any number of cheap commanders that are out there. We tried to do this here with Geode Golem, and we'll continue to do this more in the future.
Where does the idea for a Magic card come from?
One year I was on a Magic cruise and Aaron Forsyth was also there. Now he gave a presentation that was absolutely fantastic and you should go watch, although I'll warn you the sound quality isn't the best, on Magic design between the two Ravnica sets, where he covers all kinds of fun notes and things that he learned along the way. In it, he covered a list of ridiculous time spiral jokes, and one that really stuck with me and made me smile is how Cyclopean Giant was a mashup of Cyclopean Tomb and two Cyclopean mummies. Absolutely ridiculous. So when I was working on Mystery Booster and making some silly cards, I thought I'd go one further. Cyclopean Titan, which is two Cyclopean Giants and a Cyclopean Snare. A real insider reference there. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? I studied creative writing in college. Poetry, fiction, that kind of thing. And one teacher told me something that will always stick with me. He said, a lot of people think poetry is about the act of writing, but in reality, it's about the act of listening. It's about looking at the world around you, about listening to the chirps of the birds and what they sound like. What do they sound like? About looking at the different shades of grass and really noticing the different colors. What are those shades? It's about feeling your own emotions, your anger and your happiness. Why do you feel them? What do they make you feel? That is how the best poems are made. It's about hearing and seeing and feeling. Those are the best poems. Where does the idea for a Magic card come from? Well, I think it's like a good poem.